You may be seated. Last week, as we continued in our series of looking at the person of David, last week we looked at how David was chased for months or years, how he was moving location to location, moving, because the king was seeking him to kill him. We looked and talked about a game of hide and seek, except this was a game of hide and seek for his life. And David, we looked at how physically he was moving all these different places, but we really sat in the emotional and internal and mental anguish and struggle. And David shares that with us from the Psalms, how he is struggling during this time, writing from the caves. And yet, even in his struggle, even when the Lord's anointed is not experiencing what we would desire, David never takes his eyes off of his God. He continues to follow, to trust, and believe that he will be delivered. So today I want you to look, we're going to be in 1 Samuel, chapter 24 mostly. I'm going to look at 23 to start. But chapter 24 of 1 Samuel is where we're going to be. As you flip there, if you get through Deuteronomy and Joshua and Judges, keep going, you're so close to Samuel. If you get to Chronicles or Kings, you've gone a little bit too far. If you've gotten to Psalms, go backwards again. The reason I say that is I know that sitting in the audience sometimes and trying to find a passage of Scripture can feel humiliating at times, or you feel like you don't belong, and you absolutely do. It is not embarrassing to look at a table of contents. It is not embarrassing to pull it up on your phone in any way, because you want to hear from God and you want to read His Word. And so do not feel embarrassed by that in any way. Soapbox finished. We're going to continue on. 1 Samuel chapter 23. I told you we were in 24, but we're going to look at 23 for a second. Verse 26. Saul went on one side of the mountain, and David and his men were on the other side of the mountain. They're close, all right? Saul is keying in. And David was hurrying to get away from Saul as Saul and his men were closing in on David and his men to capture him. Most likely not just to capture, but to kill. Verse 27, and a messenger came to Saul saying, "Hurry, come, for the Philistines have made a raid against the land." And so Saul returned from pursuing after David. He went after the Philistines, and therefore the place was called the Rock of Escape. And David went up from there and lived in the strongholds of En-gedi. So, see, Saul is close. Death is but a step behind David. He is keying in. He's closing in. He is ready to fulfill what he has been hoping to do. And as he is getting there so close, right there on the same mountains, he gets word that the Philistines are now invading their land, and the king has to put aside his side hustle, his personal vendetta, and he has to go be the king. And so he has to go and he has to fight against the raid of the Philistines. And so he does that, and now, chapter 24, let's start there in verse 1. When Saul returned from following the Philistines, he was told, "Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi." And Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all of Israel and went to seek David and his men in front of the wild goats' rocks. Even while Saul is fighting the Philistines, he has an intelligence network set up to keep watching the movements of David. He is still giving resources to this search mission. He is still focused because David is constant on his mind as a thorn in his side. And the spies have found David, and it says in the wilderness of En-gedi. I've never been there. Kevin was telling me about it this week, and he said I think it's his grandmother's favorite place. But it's in this desert, kind of barren area, and it is an oasis there. There's natural streams and springs that run through En-gedi, so that means that not only do you have drink, but food is growing really well. Vegetation is healthy in En-gedi, and there's also caves. It sits up kind of higher and overlooking the Dead Sea, because everything overlooks the Dead Sea. It's the lowest point on earth. And so it is sitting up above where David can now have food, water, and hideout, and he can have a great vantage point to watch for Saul and his army. In a sense, I'm asking, why didn't you go there first? Seems like a great place to be. But he is there now. He has cover, he has food, he has drink. He is in good shape. But Saul's group has located him. Saul raises up 3,000 choice men. It sounds a lot like Pharaoh sending out the 10,000, I think, choice chariots. Saul has raised up 3,000 choice men to go and fight the 400 to 600 men that David has. Saul gets 3,000 of the best to go fight this group of discontents of 400 to 600 men. He is not taking this lightly, so he has his elite special forces team. They are now in that En-Gedi area, and the way that you would walk around that mountainside and along the caves is that the shepherds have kind of created tracks and trails. And so Saul and his army are walking these trails looking for signs of David when verse 3 happens. Please don't make this your life verse. And he came to the sheepfolds by the way where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Okay? In our house, that would be called number 2. In the Bible, that is called lowering his robe. I'm losing the term now, but covering his feet. So Saul has to go to the bathroom. So he is a king. He is distinguished. He goes into the cave so nobody can see the king. And he goes to the restroom. All right? But the end of verse 3 is important. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. Saul is in the most vulnerable state. His robe's around his ankles. He is a sitting duck right there. And David is behind him in the dark. He can't see him. David can see where the light's coming from and see Saul, but Saul cannot see the danger that lies behind him. And then the whispers start growing in David's ear. Verse 4, hear what they say. I'm sure we would have been in that same crowd. And the men of David said to him, "Here's the day the Lord has said to you. Behold, I give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you." And David arose and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's robe. David is in the cave, and he has to be in shock right now. He's hiding from Saul, who then walks in by himself into this cave. His back is to David, and David is looking out, and then all the men in his ear begin saying, "This is the moment. God has orchestrated this for you. He has brought you the one who seeks you, who is trying to kill you. He has given him to you on a silver platter. Only God could create this circumstance. Only God could create this circumstance." And then they're going, "Go and kill the king." They use a quotation in verse 4. "Here is the day which the Lord has said to you, behold, I will give your enemy into your hand. You shall do to him as it seems good to you." The problem is this quotation can't be found anywhere else in Scripture. We're not sure where this quotation came from. It's not a prophecy that Israel had and we have it recorded. So there's one of two options that could be going on with this. Either one, the people are just making up a prophecy of God. They're just saying, this must be, so we're going to speak for God and say, God has told us, go and kill him. So either there's a false prophecy or they are misinterpreting a prophecy that was meant for somewhere else. Maybe this was a prophecy against the Amorites or the Philistines that, hey, go and do what shall please you with them. So either they have made up a word of the Lord or they are misinterpreting the word of the Lord, and both are dangerous things. See, when we make up the word of the Lord, we can say that God gave us the power and the go-ahead to do whatever we want, and we can justify every action we do. How many people are using, well, I think God would want this. His character would allow for this, so I'm going to justify my works through it. Or how many of us take the word of the Lord and we twist it to make it something that we want? That word of Jesus, ask and it will be given to you, in the hands of a prosperity preacher is a very dangerous thing, isn't it? Because you can get a lot of worldly and selfish claims and prayers prayed that are not in line with the will and the way of God in any way. But yet we can twist the word of God to fit our own desires. David is given bad advice or bad wisdom. Said it's from the Lord. But David, what does he do? He stealthily goes up behind the king and he cuts off a corner of his robe. David, this powerful, violent fighter who has everybody in his ear saying, go and do what sounds good to you. Go and do what is right in your eye. Go and take out the king. He's right here. It's too easy. Only God could have placed him here. David goes up. He's within striking distance. To cut off a corner of his robe, you could also slit his throat in a moment. Within a mere few seconds, Saul could be eliminated. He could be done. It could be over. So why does David cut the corner of his robe? Why does he cut the corner of his robe? I read a lot this week about what the meaning of that could be. A lot of ink was spilled, and some of it was a much ado. I think they were taking it a little too far. One guy says, well, when the robe is cut, that it invalidates that robe, and thus you're invalidating the kingdom because the king was supposed to wear a seamless robe and all of this, and going back, it was a lot. Some people want to take it down to just, it's a prank. He's just messing with the king, just getting in his head even more. I think the best way of understanding this is that David was giving Saul material evidence to say, I could have killed you. You were right there. But I'm not trying to kill you. Everybody's telling you I'm trying to kill you. I'm not trying to kill you. I'm not out for your blood. You're out for mine. I'm not out for yours. I let you live. Verse 5, David's gone, he's cut the robe, and then catch this. This is wild. And afterwards, David's heart struck him because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe. And he said to the men, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord and the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing as he is the Lord's anointed. So David persuaded his men with these words and did not permit them to attack Saul. And Saul rose up and left the cave and went on his way. David has this perfect opportunity. And he is better than what just about every single one of us how we would have acted. And yet, after he has just cut off the robe, he did no harm. After he's cut off the robe, conviction overtakes David. One thing I've learned about conviction over the last few years is that conviction is different for each of us. There are some things that are black and white that God says, do not do this. But there are also places where I am convicted that you will never be convicted. A conviction I have a conviction at times where I should speak to just about every single person that walks in this room every single Sunday. Most of you will go home only having spoken to 7 people. You don't have any conviction about that, and that's okay. But God has placed this conviction on me, and I lay in bed on Sunday nights recounting, why didn't I get to talk to them, or how did I miss them, and should I text them this week, or send an email? It's just these convictions. Maybe that's from God, maybe it's not. I don't know, but we all have unique convictions as well. David is convicted after cutting the robe of the king. I'm not sure, but I think even as he was stealthily making his way to Saul, I think the Spirit of God was telling him, David, stop. David, don't do it. David, put it away. David, put your knife down. David, don't get closer. David, stop looking at him. David, stop taking that step. I believe that the Spirit was telling him even before. I think he knew what he was doing was going to cause this conviction. And I think that he was ignoring or silencing the Spirit of God in his life as he was making his way there. And then when he gets there, he wants to kill the king. But he's not going to go all the way, but he'll do a little bit. In battles with sin, we can have those voices of the Spirit convicting and saying, stop. Stop looking, stop saying, stop thinking, stop going. And yet we get closer and we get closer and then we get closer. And we may veer away at the very end. At the last moment, we may shut it down. We may turn aside. We may look away. I don't know. But we know that conviction of taking that step and putting ourselves even in more dangerous situations. And I think this is what David was doing. See, God was convicting him in the aftermath of that. No one else in that cave was convicted, but David was. What I've learned over the last few years is that on this road of seeking to know and follow Jesus, that the closer I get to Jesus, the more out of alignment I feel like I am. That doesn't mean I feel like I'm more sinful. No, I've taken major steps in fighting sin. But I also see, I think because I get a closer picture of Jesus, I see just how much my life contrasts and how much I fall short. And there's new convictions I never would have had back in the day, that now I'm going, God is wrestling with me on that. Paul writes about conviction in 1 Corinthians. He's talking about food sacrificed to idols, and he says that there's no issue eating food sacrificed to idols. He's completely okay with that. But he says it is wrong if somebody in your party is bothered by eating food sacrificed to idols, then you need to adhere to their conviction. You need to respect what is bothering them, and not for the sake of food and drink. Don't violate someone's conscience or make a brother cause to stumble. I think as we think over this, we all have convictions, and I hope that God is even growing convictions in you, that He's pruning you and trimming you and making you more aligned with Him. And these convictions that you have, I hope that you listen to. I'll throw her under the bus, but I always use situations about me, but I'm going to do you. You're okay with this, I think. It's not in the notes, so we're just going for it. There was a show Carlin watched for probably 15 seasons and really enjoyed. It's a show many of you watch. I'm not even going to tell you the name of the show because I'm not trying to place conviction on you. Well, yes, I am. I'm okay with placing conviction on you. If God convicts you on this, you need to respond to it. If He doesn't, then I'm okay with that. Carlin would watch The Bachelor or Bachelorette or all this sort of stuff all the time. And then about 3-4 years ago, just conviction fell on her and said, honestly, what I'm putting in myself is just not good. She felt the conviction, and for a few months it was hard. Like, you really feel like you're missing out. People are talking about it. I don't know who He's going to choose. I quit mid-season. I can't watch it anymore. I mean, these are big life decisions because that marriage is going to last for 6 months, guys. I mean, come on. But the conviction came on her, and now she's going, yeah, back in the day, that wasn't a conviction. I watched that. I didn't mind telling people. But it was a conviction that came on her that she had to respond to. Are you receiving new convictions, and are you ignoring them, or are you responding to them? There's nothing wrong with drinking alcohol, but if you have a conviction about drinking alcohol, then don't drink alcohol. Is there drinking alcohol in excess? Yes, we can talk all about that. But if you have a conviction with a movie or a show or a relationship, respond to it. If you're convicted about how you treated somebody, even if they don't seem to care, will you seek reconciliation? Will you respond to the conviction of the Spirit on you? David was convicted, and he responded. He knew that Saul was placed in authority by God, and even though Saul didn't align with how David thought the king should be, it was not David's right to kill him. It wasn't his right. God set him up as king. When God is done with Saul being king, He will remove him. I doubt very many people in this room or even in our nation have gotten their votes exactly how they voted over the last 6 years. There's few people that were a Trump-Biden ticket, but that's a pretty few and far between logic. I would venture to guess that most people that voted over the last 6 years have been disappointed in the outcome. The question is, even if they don't align with your policies or the way that they lead, how do you handle that? Can you still respect the authority that God has placed, or do you fight against it? The king of David's the king of David's nation wanted to kill him. But David wouldn't succumb to that level. It was there, but he wouldn't do it. Not only would he not do it, he wouldn't let his men do it. He talks them out of killing the king. He persuades them not to do it. David could have easily, if he would have been us, said, well, I'm not doing it, but if they want to kill him, I don't mind. I'm not going to do it. I'm convicted, but but you just go do you. No. David actively persuades his men not to do that. Not only does David not listen to the crowd, he convinces the crowd to act in a way that honors God. He allowed conviction of the Spirit to speak louder than the crowd. See, every single person in that cave would have disagreed with David. Every single person. Every one of them would have been perplexed. Honestly, they'd be saying, David, if you just let us kill him, it'll be over. We can stop hiding in a cave. We can come out. We can have peace. We can have joy. We can be back with our families. We can go back home. We can have this how it's supposed to be. And you know they're going to make you king, David. It can all be over. We can be in power. But David says no. All right, let's finish up this passage. Verse 7, Saul walks out at the end of verse 7. Verse 8, it says this, afterward David also arose. So Saul's out of the cave now. Now David arose, he went out of the cave, and he called after Saul, my lord the king. When Saul looked behind him, David was bowed with his face to the earth and paying homage to him. And David said to Saul, why do you listen to the words of the men who say, behold, David seeks your harm? Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today into my hand in the cave. And some even told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand. For by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you. Though you hunt for my life to take it. Verse 12, may the Lord judge between me and you, and may the Lord avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you. So David goes out of the cave and he says, hey, Saul, I just want you to know what just happened. There's a few things we see. First, David treats the king with honor and reverence. David comes out and he says, my Lord the king. He uses terms to show the honor that he bestows upon Saul. The same person that called him just the son of Jesse and wouldn't even use his name. David says, my Lord the king. He'll later call him in verse 11, Father. David shows honor and respect to the king. David seeks peace with Saul. Why are you listening to these men saying, I'm trying to harm you? I could have harmed you. I could have killed you, but I spared you. I am not trying to harm you, Saul. You were ripe for the killing, but I didn't do it. I am here to make peace, not war. The third thing we see is David shows mercy. He holds up the robe. And he says, I think to Saul, hey, why don't you look down? See, I cut the corner of your robe with my hand. And by the fact that I cut the corner of your robe and I didn't cut you, you will know that there's no wrong or treason in my hands. I spared you. I saved you. You are alive because of me. Yes, the same one who chopped the head off of Goliath, the same one who killed 200 Philistines just so I could marry your daughter. I was there and you had no clue. I was within reach of you. You did not know it, and yet you are still breathing only because of the mercy that I have shown you. Finally, David shows us his faith. Verse 12, may the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you. David's saying, it's not my job to kill you. No, the Lord who anointed me to be king will make me the king. I'm going to wait on him. I'm going to trust him. I'm going to believe in him. Yeah, I'm tired and weary in this journey. Yeah, I'm exhausted and I wish it was over. But I'm not rushing ahead of what God is doing. The scene ends with Saul making an apology to David and saying, hey, will you have mercy on me? I know you're going to be king one day. And you would think that it's happily ever after. Oh, wow, David, thank you for saving me. 2 chapters later, David will again be searched by Saul, sought to kill him. And he will go and actually take his spear and show him Again, I could kill you. I didn't. I don't mean you harm. Saul, for the rest of his life, will try to seek and kill David. He apologizes, but he doesn't mean it. All right, so I spent 18 minutes telling you a story you could have read in 3 minutes. It was 12 verses. Okay? There's got to be a point to that. So let's get to the so what points. I'll throw them up, or Matt will throw them up on the screen. You can power through those, Matt, and go to the next slide. The first thing that we need to get to is, what do we learn from David? Don't race ahead of God. Don't race ahead of God. I think if you'll press to the right, Matt, twice, it'll come up for you. There you go. Don't race ahead of God. You guys have known me a decent bit. I am pretty active. I like to get things going. I have ideas pop in my head. I'm like, let's just do it. Let's just go for it. Let's just see if it'll work. I like to run. I like to be busy. I like to be doing things. I like to start going and say, hey, God, why don't you catch up? I like to have an idea that comes in my head. I'm like, hey, God, I'm going to do this. You're invited to join me. But as we've been studying in the book of this Experiencing God book, it's not we invite God to join us. No, God is working always and everywhere. We are to join in Him what He is doing. But so often in my life, I race ahead before I discern, is this from God? Does God want me to do this? I'm just like, yeah, it sounds like a great idea. Let's go do it. We need to be careful racing ahead of God. If David would have raced ahead of God, Saul would be bleeding out in that cave. The second thing I need us to see is our plans and our ways are not always right. Some of you need to internalize that because we have a pretty high view of self. Our plans and our ways are not always right. Had I told you that Saul had wandered into the cave that David was hiding in, he was in a vulnerable state, all of us would say, David, go make yourself king. This is what it's been coming towards. But you hear that term? Go make yourself king. David had no business making himself king. David had no business even being married to the king's daughter. Remember, he wasn't even worthy of that. He was the last born, a shepherd boy from a no big deal family. It's God that made David king. He doesn't make himself king. God is the one that has the plan that he needs to be following. So I ask you this morning, whose plans are you living out? Whose plans for your life are you following? Because all of us have plans for our life where we want to see things going. But maybe your way and your plan is not always right or always best. The third thing, this is a hard one. We are all tested in many ways. As I was reading through this story of David with this temptation to kill Saul, it made me think of Jesus in the wilderness after his 40 days of fasting when Satan begins to test him. He tests him first with bread because he's hungry and tired. He tests him with power and authority and position. He tests him with everything that Jesus, he would think, would want. And in this moment, David is tested. Are you going to trust me and wait on me, or are you going to take it into your own hands? Are you going to do it my way, or are you going to do it your way? I didn't tell you to go and fight them. David, in many ways, is faithful, and yet we do still see conviction that he would confess. As you experience tests, the crowds may be against you. All the wisdom of culture may be saying something completely to the opposite. You may be offered everything you've always wanted, and yet it may not be what is best. Will you seek God in the tests and trust Him when you're tempted? Finally, the story of David forces us to consider the timing of God. The last 3 weeks or more, God's been teaching me a lot about this word, patience. I told you I'm active, I like to be doing, I like to be going, and say, God, catch up. And every single week in my Experiencing God group, every single week in the third, what is God teaching you? I think I've written patience or wait on like 4 out of 5 days every single week. God will not let me move past this word of patience. See, I am active, I'm a doer, I'm busy, I'm a starter. Sustaining can be difficult for me. But God keeps telling me to wait. He keeps telling me, Jordan, I love this church infinitely more than you do. Jordan, I care about the lost in our community infinitely more than you do. Jordan, I care about my kingdom advancing infinitely more than you do. But do you believe me? I'm not just wasting time. I didn't forget. I'm not working on something else. He's saying, wait. You need to trust my plans, my way. In some ways, he said, the speed you're wanting to go, you cannot do. You will fail at that speed that you think you need to go. Wait on me. Be patient with me. I am doing a work right now in your midst. Just open your eyes and quit being so focused on getting this to be accomplished. And I doubt I'm the only one struggling with patience right now. I doubt I'm the only one struggling with the timing of God in your life right now. I doubt I'm the only one that's struggling with waiting on God. I bet you there are people in this room that are waiting on a spouse, that are waiting on a child, that are waiting on a house, that are waiting on a test result, that are waiting on a diagnosis, that are waiting on a job, that are waiting on a healing, that are waiting on a change, that are waiting on an answer. And you're going, God, I am tired of waiting. I have been waiting and waiting and waiting. Why are you not working? But don't take the bait of Saul in your cave. Don't take the easy way. Wait on me. When I say go, it's time to go. But don't go before me, because then you're running on your own. That's what Joshua did. After they defeated Jericho, the walls came tumbling down. They were on a high. We can beat anybody. So let's go fight this little tiny puny town of Ai. So he sends up a few men. And you know what? First time the Israel army loses somebody under Joshua's command. Because they didn't wait on God. They ran without him. They trusted in their own ways. They trusted in their own timing. Are you getting impatient and restless? Are you getting discouraged? Remember, David is exhausted and hungry. He's sleepless. He's fatigued. He's stretched to his physical limits. He's in much mental anguish. He is struggling in every way imaginable. He wants the journey through the valley to be over. He wants his deliverance now. It is right there, and yet he is waiting on the Lord. I'll end with this. Every week when I study a passage, the first thing that I do is I grab the passage we're going to be studying, I print it off on a sheet of white paper, and I write all over it. Highlight different things, ask the questions I'm asking, because if I'm asking the questions, I bet you're asking the questions, and that's how I start sermon prep every single week. Before I knew the passage, I printed it off before I even read the first verse of chapter 24. God just threw into my mind, not my will, but yours be done. And just gave me that lens to look at this whole passage. And as Cooper taught us this morning, or shared with us this morning, that's the prayer of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane after the Lord's Supper, before his arrest, before his beating, before his trial, before his murder. And he knows what is coming. And he is praying, God, if there's any other way to save the world, will you show me? Will you take this cup from me? But not my will, but yours be done. Jesus prays that and then follows God. David, in a sense, is living and embodying, not my will, but yours be done. And I ask you to consider in your own life, as you look at the struggles, as you look at the pain, as you look at the torment, as you look at what's ahead, as you look at where you're struggling, where you're waiting, where you're impatient, as you look at all of these issues that you're dealing with, as you look at the scars of what you've walked through and the history that you've brought into this place, as you look at all the things that disqualify you, will you pray, not my will, but yours be done? God, not my way because your way is better. Not my timing because your timing is best. Not my ideas because your ideas are the best. Not my power because you're more powerful. Will you pray, not my will, but yours be done? We can do good things in our own strength. But we can do things that change eternities when we trust in what God is doing. And we lean into where He is working and join Him. When we pray, not my will, but yours be done. We lay aside our motives and our wishes and our preferences and our dreams, and we say, God, all I want to do is honor you. And I need you. I need you for this battle I'm in. I need you for this struggle I'm facing. I need you for this difficulty I'm going through. So I don't know where you are right now. I don't know if you're in a season of struggle. I don't know if you're in a season of doubt, a season of wondering, a season of waiting. But will you pray, not my will, but yours